Hey, hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining. Welcome to today's career panel on biodiversity and habitat conservation careers. My name is Courtney Cochran. I serve as the manager of youth leadership at National Wildlife Federation in our education and engagement team. And I have the privilege of hosting today's career panel. As I mentioned, today's panel will focus on careers in biodiversity and habitat conservation, whether it's studying the impacts of climate on native plant species, creating pollinator-friendly gardens, restoring native plant communities, or rethinking how we manage urban spaces. This field offers a wide range of career paths that blend science, art, and a deep respect for nature. Our panelists have a wealth of varied professional experience from academia, the nonprofit sector, research, and more. Each panelist will share a bit of their personal and professional journeys, the work they do, and their advice for young environmental leaders seeking to make a difference in this area of work in their own career paths. After each panelist introduces themselves, we'll jump into the Q&A section of the event. So please feel free to submit any questions you have as they're presenting, either in the chat or the Q&A box, and we will ask as many of your questions as we can following the presentations. So to start things off, I would like to introduce our first panelist, Dr. Tanisha Williams. Dr. Williams is an assistant professor of plant biology at the University of Georgia and director of the UGA Herbarium, where she leads research at the intersection of plant ecology, conservation, and ethnobotany. Dr. Williams' passion for botany began with a study abroad experience in the Amazonian rainforest of Peru. She went on to earn her BS from Pennsylvania State University, an MS from California State University, Los Angeles, and a PhD from the University of Connecticut. Her doctoral research, supported by a U.S. Fulbright Fellowship at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology in Cape Town, South Africa, examined how environmental change influences flower phenology and pelargonium using herbarium records, common garden experiments, and species distribution models. Dr. Williams is also deeply committed to science communication, mentorship, and broadening participation in STEM. She's the founder of Black Botanist Week, a global initiative that celebrates and amplifies Black scientists in plant biology, and her outreach spans public engagement, museum collaborations, and policy advocacy. Dr. Williams, thank you so much for being with us today. Could you please share a bit more about your background and career journey?
Thank you so much, Courtney, for having me here. I'm going to share my slides with you all. I just have a quick few slides that I want to share about the places that you can go around the world with plants or in your own community as well. So these are some of the places that plants have taken me. So this is what my educational pathway looks like, from schooling to different research projects. And I just like to look at this map to just kind of think like a person from Washington, D.C., in a little small neighborhood. I get to travel the world and study how cool plants are and how people use plants and move plants. So I'm from Washington, D.C., born and raised, native Washingtonian. Courtney gave my resume, but I'll give it again. Went to Penn State, and during that time, I always encourage undergraduate students, if they can, to do a study abroad. And I got a scholarship to do a study abroad in the Amazonian rainforest in Peru, studying mahogany trees. And that's where it really sparked my interest in the environment and plants. Hopefully you can't hear my cat. I went after I graduated from Penn State with my bachelor's degree. I actually went back home to DC and worked for 2 years. I worked in an environmental consulting company that put together the first national climate change plan for the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia. The two states in DC had their own climate change plans, but our borders are transient, and we do a lot of work with Maryland and Virginia. And we wanted to put a panel together to make the first ever national capital region climate change plan. After I finished that, I went to California to study poplar trees, to study them in California and Nevada, and kind of looking at if they hybridize and really updating a study that a scientist had done in the early 50s to see if we saw changes there. And we saw a lot of changes, and we had new techniques to learn from this study from the 50s. So we updated that. And then I went to Connecticut to get my PhD, but most of my research, or all of my research, was done in South Africa. So I did my schooling in Connecticut, but did all of my research in the summers and spent about 4 years back and forth in Cape Town region and traveling all over South Africa looking for my pelargonium plants. So pelargoniums are sister genus to geraniums that you may know. We have a lot of folks that are buying geraniums now for their gardens. And then I went to a postdoc, which is, if you know what residency is for a medical doctor, it's just extra training for any of the other sciences. And that was in Pennsylvania, but my work really tapped into ethnobotany. So, kind of really looking at how traditional ecological knowledge and indigenous peoples use plants, and working with a community in Australia, an indigenous community in Australia, to see how their use of plants will it be resilient to climate change. That was a really exciting project, and that research has been published, and we have a couple other papers coming out from that with the community. And then from there, I came to the job that I'm at now at the University of Georgia, and I get to work with a bunch of students from K through all the way up to adulthood. I have a lot of interns that intern with me in the herbarium. And so the herbarium is a museum facility, and is a collection of preserved plants. And these plants are some of the greatest resources that we have to know that climate change is impacting plant species, and we can learn about those things through herbaria. And it's very similar to like the ice cores that you hear about. Herbaria can tell us very similar things. And also at the University of Georgia, I just got my program for a study abroad program in South Africa. So I'll be leading that in the summer of 2027. So I'm super excited to take more students to South Africa to learn about plants and also to learn about people, because there's a lot of overlap with indigenous practices using plants in South Africa. So that is a bit about my journey and how plants have really propelled me to learn about many different plants and many different people around the world. And so this is a slide of all the things that I love researching. Herbaria is number one. This is why I'm the director of a herbarium. I love looking at these dried plant specimens and seeing what stories they tell. They tell stories about plants, they tell stories about people, they tell stories about the landscape. But I also use genetics and genomics tools, a lot of computer science and modeling, and a lot of statistics and math. So I always tell my students, take those stats class because it's really important in science as well. So at the center of that is what I really love to do after I learn about all these plants. So I love to conserve biodiversity and look at how, like, why we have so many plants in certain places and why not other places. But I really love mentoring students, mentoring other teachers and other herbaria folks, and science communication is something that I love. I've been training to be a more effective science communicator since I've been in graduate school. I've taken classes, I've gone to conferences, I've talked to Congress, I've talked to senators. I just love talking about science and how cool plants are. And this is my last slide. This is where I'm at today. This is my lab. We're a lab of plants, people, climate change, conservation, and herbaria. This is showing some of the students that I work with. They do all sorts of things that are not even closely related to what I'm doing, but I'm learning so much. They're learning so much. So if you want to check us out, here are some of the links and websites. The herbarium has a Instagram page at UGA Herbarium. I keep that pretty active, and I have a student that's really great at that as well. And if you want to learn more about some of the ethnobotanical work, so how people impact plants, we do have a Gullah Geechee coloring book. I work with a Gullah Geechee community on the coast of Savannah, and we have a coloring book, and we're going to have a plant guide out for free very soon. So just email me, and I'll send you some information. But that's a bit about me and my plant journey. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tanisha. Love that coloring book idea. Sounds super fun. All right. So next up, we will hear from David McKinney. David is a horticulturist, ecologist, entomologist, and plant physiologist, currently working as the curator at the Iowa Arboretum and Gardens, where he manages 170 acres of gardens, prairie restoration, and native woodland. Originally from Colorado, he received 3 degrees in horticulture from Colorado State University, while also coordinating extensive perennial trials and demonstration gardens. He is passionate about native plants and the interactions between plants and wildlife. David constantly explores and experiments with cutting-edge methods and resilient ecological approaches to natural resource management, translating those strategies into gardening and building urban habitat. He believes whether humans want to acknowledge as much, we are a part of the ecosystems around us. We have the opportunity to alter and shape our landscapes to be refuges, sanctuaries, theaters, and temples to the natural world. He works to explore human roles in the stewardship of Anthropocene wildlife. David, thanks so much for being with us today. I'll turn it over to you to share a bit about your career path.
Thank you, Courtney. Um, Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting me to this, and thanks for tuning in, all of you who are tuning in. And I got my start in the realm of plants pretty early on, as even probably a toddler. I was one of those kids that would dig up dandelions from the garden in the yard and try to keep them alive in like a paper cup on the windowsill. Neither of my parents are plant people, so I don't know how I got into this world or where my fascination for plants really came from. But it was very early on. I grew up in a suburb of Denver, Colorado, and I was also kind of the kid that would go outside and catch insects and catch small animals and try to care for them for a couple of days just to learn everything that I possibly could about those things and then release them back to where I found them, just to learn as much as I possibly could about how those animals came to be in my home garden in the middle of Denver and also what they were doing there, how they were interacting with my home and with my garden. And as a teenager, my love of plants led me into lawn service because I didn't really know at the time that like native plants and conservation was really an option. And quite frankly, my family had perceptions that there wouldn't be any money in conservation or growing plants. As many of the panelists probably know, there is a lot of misconceptions about the world of conservation and about the world of plant growing that there isn't any money and there isn't any jobs in it when there's actually a vast world of jobs that have to do with conservation growing. And eventually, I discovered the world of horticulture and cite my sets on a college program at Colorado State University to get that education that I needed. I earned 2 bachelor's degrees in horticulture, one in greenhouse management and the other in nursery and landscape management. And I worked through college in mostly ornamental horticulture. For several years, I coordinated the Colorado State University 3-year perennial trials, which, if you don't know what a perennial is, it's a plant that returns year after year. And we were evaluating them in the high elevation growing climate of Fort Collins, Colorado, seeing what the light intensity and all of the lovely growing conditions that come with growing in a desert were doing to all of these ornamental plants that are oftentimes trialed in places like the Midwest or the Mid-Atlantic, where they seem to do a little bit better than in the desert. And during that time, I became fascinated by the environmental stress physiology, how plants were responding to environmental pressures of things like drought, fertilizer applications, road salt, irrigation, and all of these things that we subject plants to. I really got fascinated with how plants were individually responding on like a species basis. And these curious observations led me to stay on for a master's degree where I studied plant environmental stress physiology, which is just a really long way of saying that I learned how to kill plants pretty quickly using a couple of different environmental techniques. My area of interest was specifically studying how elevated carbon dioxide concentrations impact the rate of photosynthesis and plant acclimation to elevated carbon dioxide. So when we increase the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, how do plants respond? How does photosynthesis being regulated in those plants? And basically, as part of this program, I got to delve into the implications of high concentrations of carbon dioxide on selection pressures and community dynamics of native ecosystems. So how is our elevated CO2 concentration in the atmosphere impacting how individual plant communities are responding, and what the dynamics were if woody plants were given a competitive edge, or if forbs or grasses were being given a competitive edge, and things like that. And one of the things that we discovered is that plants are lazy. Plants don't want to do any more work than they have to. And so when you elevate the carbon dioxide concentration, it makes photosynthesis significantly easier for the plants, and they downregulate their photosynthesis rate in response. And so they basically just sit there fat and happy, not necessarily increasing the amount of carbon dioxide they're taking in, which has incredible implications for conservation because we're sort of realizing now that we can't necessarily rely on plants to scrub our atmosphere of carbon dioxide. Another thing that we learned is that selection pressure moves towards woody plants, those things that can store carbon in the form of lignin or wood, or large, long-lived forbs that can store a lot of energy underground. And so the future, unfortunately, is shrubs and trees. If you're a prairie manager, you know that that's one of the big things that we battle a lot. And we're going to have a really hard time in the future managing particularly woody invasive species, things like honeysuckle, because selection pressure in the atmosphere is headed towards that direction. But from there, I became a horticulture specialist with the Denver Zoo. If you get the chance to even just intern as a zoo horticulturist, I highly recommend it. It's a really, really fun job. And you get to experience a lot of different things in the plant world and in the animal world. And a lot of my responsibilities was landscape management, attempting to use horticultural varieties and native plants in the Denver area to emulate habitats where the animals were originally from. So things like the steppe of Mongolia or the steppe of South Africa. We were using shortgrass prairie plants to emulate those spaces, which was a lot of fun. However, as part of that project, I got to work on really cool initiatives like the Rocky Mountain Pika Project, which, if you don't know what pikas are, they are a small rabbit relative that live in the alpine in scree fields. They're adorable, but they're under threat from climate change because alpine spaces are increasing in temperature significantly faster than a lot of other ecosystems. And so we got to go out and evaluate community dynamics in response to climate change, and also get to count the number of individual pikas that were in colonies, which was so much fun. And then another initiative that the Denver Zoo is a part of is basically looking at land management impacts on community dynamics in pasture where they're raising North American bison, and how does land management impact conservation of that species. So I got to be a part of that. And then everyone's question is, how did I move from Denver to Iowa, to rural Iowa? It's because I fell in love with a Midwesterner during the pandemic, and moved to Iowa to join them, and started my role here at the Iowa Arboretum about 5 years ago. And I very quickly fell in love with the prairie and with prairie conservation, and believe that it's really important to conserve those species, those spaces, and start using what I learn in prairie conservation to build urban habitat. And so one of the things that I do is I try to translate native plant palettes to urban landscape design. And as a plant stress physiologist, I get the chance to study how those native plants respond to urban challenges. Things like the urban heat island effect, road salt, intense soil disturbance, pollution, and all of these lovely modern challenges that we deal with in home gardens. How are native plants responding? And then getting to publish those results and making individual plant recommendations for our area. And what we're learning is that most of these disturbed urban habitats require modern approaches to conservation, realizing that there are some downfalls of local ecotype plants versus how they respond to urban environments completely transformed to how it would have been historically 250 years ago. And so trying to take clues of plants that are still appropriate for planting here in central Iowa versus those things that are going to deal with a lot of urban challenges, trying to plant those native plants there. One of the things that we also get to do is a lot of naturalistic design, particularly in large acreages. But one of my favorite roles that I get to play is getting to educate people about these plants. And one of our largest education exhibits recently was we exhibited at the Philadelphia Flower Show for an exhibit called American Anemoia, where we used native plants to show that native plants have always been a part of American gardening. It's not a new trend or something that is just now picking up. Native plants have been part of our gardening palette since the beginning, which was a lot of fun. And I just get to play around with both prairie, woodlands, and ornamental plants all in one go and marry those concepts of conservation and land management to hopefully lead to the future of large acreage management. So thank you.
Amazing. Thanks so much, David. Really fascinating career journey, and definitely envious of your work with the pica. They are so cute. All right. So next we will hear from Chad Eby. Chad is the Senior Director of Government Affairs and Sustainability at Taylor Morrison, where he leads the integration of sustainability and ESG principles, as well as the company's government affairs efforts across one of the nation's largest home builders. With background spanning the airline, high-tech, and home building industries, Chad brings deep expertise in ESG reporting, greenhouse gas accounting, and sustainable development. Over his 17 plus years at Taylor Morrison, he has shaped corporate and land strategy, supported major acquisitions, and championed initiatives that elevate environmental responsibility across the organization. Chad also serves on the board of the Energy and Environmental Building Alliance, advancing high-performance building practices across the industry. He holds a bachelor's degree in industrial engineering from Georgia Tech and an MBA from Arizona State University. Chad, same question to you as those before. Please share a bit about your career path.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you once again for inviting me today. So as you can see, I've had a very circuitous path to this. And but I've always followed my passions, and I've had a lot of passions. But I grew up in the Midwest, in Illinois, and always enjoyed being outdoors. And I was one of the kids that as soon as the sun was up, I was outside playing, and I didn't come back until the sun set. And enjoyed being outdoors and exploring. David, I got to explore some of the plains restoration projects I remember there in Illinois, which was fantastic. But similar to what you were talking about before, I always had a passion in that area, but I never really thought about making a career out of it. It just really wasn't a thing as much when I was a kid, or I didn't hear about it growing up in the Midwest. So, I decided to pursue one of my other passions initially. So I went to Georgia Tech, and went into more of the aerospace engineering side, and co-opted Delta Airlines, and did that, and then realized I really wanted to do, I wanted to broaden my horizons. So I ended up doing industrial engineering. And Dr. Williams, I just got to say, go Jackets, real quick. But so I came out and actually started in the high tech industry out of college, and did that for a couple of years. And I've always had fantastic timing in my career. I started in the high tech industry the day after the dot-com bubble burst, so that was very interesting. But made it through that, and then decided to pursue my MBA. So happened moved out here to Phoenix and went into the W.P. Carey School of Business here at ASU and got my MBA. Um, Coming out of that, decided, what industry do I want to take a look at now? And one of my other passions is in home building because it doesn't get more personal than someone's home, and I think that also includes the neighborhood and the community that you're in. And so I decided to pursue that. Once again, unfortunately, my timing was great. It was January 2006, right before the bubble burst in home building. So nailed that one as well. I actually had a former boss, when I told him that story. He said, "Chad, I don't know if you're the Grim Reaper or a cockroach." I said, "I'm not sure if I like either one of those, but I'll take it." So anyways, I've been in home building, like I said, specifically at Taylor Morrison for going on 17 years. Most of that time, I was in our portfolio investment committee, so looking at buying and selling land. I always gravitated towards the land side just because, like I said, I had a passion in being outdoors and seeing land and seeing communities come up. And a few years ago, we we started to hear about ESG a lot more in the corporate world and all of that, and I kind of realized, wow, this could be my chance to move into one of my other passions and kind of marry two of my passions, which is home building and sustainability. And I got really excited about that because traditionally home building and development seems like it's kind of antithetical to sustainability, but the way that we approach it at Taylor Morrison and really focusing on the community, and realizing that sustainable communities are the communities that look even better as they go along. The communities that work together with the surrounding area, not like totally changing it or fighting against it, are those communities that look fantastic the longer you go. Plus, the edges of the community blend into the surrounding area, makes the whole community just live larger. And so I got excited about that. And, I look at it as a way of helping to move an entire industry into a direction that I think is going to benefit everybody in the long run. Not all the other home builders have the emphasis on sustainability that we do, but because of what we're doing, and our relationship with National Wildlife Federation, which I'll get to in a minute, it's kind of dragging the industry kicking and screaming along, which I am very proud about, that we're doing that. So um, in my role here at Taylor Morrison for sustainability, the things that I do, one is I head up our sustainability reporting. So for the past 8 years, we've put out a corporate sustainability and belonging report. And part of that is also our greenhouse gas emissions. So I spearhead a lot of that effort, gathering data for greenhouse gas inventory and all that. And then the other big part of what I do is work with National Wildlife Federation and our partnership there, which we've had since 2019. And that's been a fantastic thing. It's unique in the building industry, and what we do is there's actually three, and then hopefully a fourth coming soon, piece that we really focus on. One is that we took the Monarch Pledge. And so now every one of our communities going forward has a monarch garden or a pollinator garden located in a prominent area of the community, and a pretty large area. It depends on the size of the community. And some of the small little Bay Area communities where everything's super tight, it could be as small as 400 square feet spread across the development. In other communities, like for example, in Texas, in Houston, Texas, we have huge communities, and we'll seed entire fields with pollinator plants and milkweed, and so you just have these wonderful fields of habitat. So that's one part. Another part is whenever we have a community, there are times where just because of the layout of the community, or we're doing a park, or maybe there's wetlands or something that we don't want to disturb, we'll have those areas. and we will certify those as native open space habitat. And in some cases, we'll actually restore it. Oftentimes, we'll be building in former agricultural areas where that native habitat has been removed and for crops and all that. And then when we go back in, we'll actually take that land and restore it using native plants and all that to native habitat. So that part gets me really excited as well. And then finally, we have the nature play spaces where in a lot of the communities out there, if we have an amenity like a playground or something like that, instead of using the big plastic and metal structures that kind of stick out, we work with National Wildlife Federation and they help us design what we call the uh, uh, nature play spaces where they are the tones and the hues are much more natural, the materials are much more natural, and they're really meant to encourage that interaction of children and actually all ages that encourage that interaction with nature. So you'll see a lot more like mounds and tunnels and things to climb on, things like we used to do, obviously out in the woods behind our house and all that. So it's just really fun to do that. And then the fourth one that I mentioned that we're currently working on, and we have a couple of these, where we're actually certifying the whole community as a NWF certified community, where the whole community is at least native or 80% native plants, and all the common space, and then even in a lot of the cases, the yards of the homes themselves. So we have a couple of those, one in Denver, one here in Phoenix, one coming in Seattle, and hopefully that will become more and more the norm. I think it's just, we as a home builder, it's kind of interesting. I think we're unique because a lot of home builders, you think, well, our product is a home, so they put a lot of emphasis and thought and everything into the homes themselves. Whereas Taylor Morrison, I think if we could call ourselves whatever we wanted, I think we would call ourselves community builders because we don't focus as much on the home per se, but the whole community and really improving the health of the community, which includes not only the residents, the people that buy in there, but also the animals and things that have already been living there and hopefully will continue to live there. So I think that's important, and I really enjoy that. It is a passion of mine, and so kind of coming back to the main points that I wanted to get across to everybody out there was, passion is the main thing. If you have a passion for sustainability, for botany, for, whatever, definitely I would say pursue that. And look for ways that you can integrate that into, your career opportunities. And then I would say, don't shy away from certain industries. I think sometimes you can make the biggest impact in industries that are behind. They need help. They need help in catching up. And that's one of the things that excites me the most is working in this industry, which is traditionally, not necessarily sustainability focused, but bringing that along. Then I would say look for groups or companies where the leadership is really committed and are willing to commit resources to what you're doing. If you're constantly, working against the leadership in your company, it makes it very difficult. So I would say whenever you're interviewing and all that, really kind of dig into that and see what the support is and make sure that the resources are there and the support's there and they're not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. Um, Look for educational programs to help, give you a kickstart. Like I said, I have an engineering background. I didn't have a sustainability degree or anything like that, but I did look for and found some certificate programs and did that and really helped kind of kickstart my career into sustainability a couple of years ago. And then I would say, part of that is just a reminder, it's never too late. Like I said, I started this 3 years ago in my late 40s, pretty much a total 180 in my career. But I saw an opportunity to marry a couple of different passions of mine, and Even though it was a lot different, I decided to jump and do it, and it's been wonderful. It's been probably the highlight of my career so far is the role that I'm in. I'm really enjoying it. So I'll end it there and just say once again, thank you for inviting me, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Chad. Really great advice and a great example of being resilient in the face of some pretty major uh, job market challenges. So kudos and thanks for sharing that. All right, next we will move on to Kate Brittenham. Kate is the founder and principal designer at Front Stoop Gardens LLC, a woman-owned and operated ecological landscape design and gardening company specializing in native plant species. Kate holds a BA in Environmental Studies from Skidmore College and a certificate in Landscape Design from the New York Botanical Garden. She's also the co-founder of Home Earth Alliance, a nonprofit in the Capital Region of New York State, whose mission is to educate, inspire, and empower people to steward outdoor spaces to support biodiversity, mitigate climate change, and promote environmental justice. Home Earth Alliance recently established a native plant propagation center called Imagine Native Plant Farm. Kate is also the co-author of Designing Gardens with Flora of the American East with her mother, Carolyn Summers, a longtime native plant advocate. Kate, thanks so much for being with us today, and I will turn it over to you to share about your career journey.
Thank you so much, Courtney. So I'm an ecological landscape designer, not a scientist. But we follow ecological practices in our work and are constantly adapting and trying to keep up with the most recent information. So this has been fun for me listening into everybody's career journeys and getting some insight. But I think I can usually blame my mother for how I've ended up. She is also a landscape designer and, like I was mentioned, a native plant advocate. And because of her, I basically grew up in a garden. She transformed our home into a native plant haven. And I remember the first plant I was introduced to. She introduced me to Tinkerbell, which was a cultivar of mountain laurel. And of course, I was probably 3 or so at the time, and fairies and unicorns were everything to me. So I was like, oh, Tinkerbell. But that was it. That was my hook. And that got me in. And when I was young, I am lucky enough, I kind of grew up in 2 places. I went to school in suburbia, but I spent much of my childhood in the Catskills too. So I had kind of a very different, I had mountain and I had suburbia upbringing. And I think the struggle I've had is I don't really necessarily see a difference between the two. Habitat is wherever you can make it. And I think, though, I would have been surprised, honestly, as a teenager that I work outside for a living. I became a little bookish. But by the time I got to college, um, I thought I was going to be an English major and very quickly figured out that was not the case. I took a science course on a whim, Environmental Studies Basic 101, and I went, oh, yeah, this is it. But I didn't know exactly what within environmental studies I wanted to do. So I spent, the next 4 years trying to figure that out. I thought I'd do sustainable ag for a little while. Um, and I started, because of my mother's training, I started taking a couple courses down at the New York Botanical Garden in landscape design. So I had a general idea how to kind of do graphics and all of those things. And when I graduated, I was a little lost and unmoored for a little bit, not really sure. I knew I cared about the environment, didn't know how to help it. And I did outdoor ed for a little bit, which was wonderful. But I got very quickly burned out and decided that the next best thing to do was to move to a different state entirely and go work in a native plant propagation center. So I took an internship with a native plant trust in Western Massachusetts, which was a truly transformational experience. I went for the plants because I was a plant nerd, and I came away with such a extraordinary appreciation for the life that they bring in. And I was really drawn to all the insects in particular, all the hosts, all the host plants were able to support. Made some friends with, some spice bush swallowtail caterpillars and all sorts of little friends like that. And it's kind of amazing when you work with plants on that granular level that you learn what plants look like at all stages of life, which was fascinating. Um, you really get an idea for what they need, and you really get an idea for their personalities, which they definitely have in spades. And yeah, you see life just happening all around. And that's really what kind of it solidified it all for me of how to, if you build it, they will come when it comes to habitat. Um, so that's the lessons I took away from that. And I was like, this is what I want to do. And I moved, when I finished the internship, moved to Albany, New York, following a former partner. And I didn't have any jobs lined up. And no one would hire me to do the jobs I was applying for. So out of sheer frustration, I decided to start a business, which I don't recommend doing normally, but it was a true experience. And I started very small. I had one gardening client and started gardening with an ecological lens, which is different from most traditional gardening. We're not necessarily raking up all the leaves in the beginning of the spring. We're not doing a huge fall cleanup. We're not doing any pesticides or fertilizers that we don't have to. So it's a different approach. And fortunately, I had someone who was willing to kind of trust me on this one, which was big and very cool. And very slowly, I built it up, taking whatever jobs I could, started to build up a portfolio, um, said yes to too many things, got overextended, and then COVID hit. And I thought that was the end. Like, for sure, I don't think I can keep this going, but it was actually the opposite. It ended up being this huge boom and a huge change too culturally in that I had previously, every time I had a new client, had to educate and explain why I did things the way I did. And for the first time, I was experiencing people coming to me specifically for what I did, which was a huge change, huge shift. People were asking for pollinator gardens, they were asking for wildlife, they were asking for to remove their lawn, which was terribly exciting. And a lot of them were doing it too, to the point that it became overwhelming and the business was able to actually expand, which is kind of wild. And I will say that the majority of the work that we do now is lawn removal and replacement with habitat. And the photo behind me is a picture of one project that we just finished up. We like to work in phases, so this was done in phases, but this used to be all lawn, and now it is a garden. And what's crazy about it is it's on a very public, busy road in Schenectady, New York, and people drive past it all the time. And that was, I thought in my mind, a very gutsy move for the homeowner to be like, no, this is what curb appeal looks like, and I think that's really cool. But in 2022-ish, I think I and a couple other intrepid individuals decided that we wanted to take on one more project. So we started Homeworth Alliance, which is a local nonprofit. And it was nice because while I was doing all this habitat restoration work with my company, it was not, or I would say close to habitat restoration. We're not ecologists, but we try to emulate as much as we can. And while I was able to do that much with a for-profit business model, I wanted to explore it more from the nonprofit side too, because I think we've always had a mission-based approach to the company to try and get as many native plants out there as possible, as much habitat as possible. But this can be daunting for people, and plants do cost money, and labor and everything costs money. So to try to approach it from a nonprofit side allowed us to reach more people. And so we have founded a native plant farm just outside the Port of Albany. We're growing plants that are grown from seed. gathered locally. So they're ecotype native, which means they come from our specific ecoregion. So they're adapted to our specific climate. For me, in my practice, I'm a little bit more, I guess, loose with all of those options. We try to meet people where they're at as much as possible. So if that means I throw in a cultivar, I throw in a cultivar with very educated background, hopefully. But I really like what Chad was saying about approaching it as a community builder. I think that's what we try to do too. It's, a lot of our clients are people who, especially now, are new homeowners who bought a house and forgot that the landscape came with it and are a little overwhelmed by that. And that's totally understandable. And I appreciate that they reach out to us and not to just necessarily continue adding pesticides and fertilizers to a lawn. So I do see it as community building for not just wildlife, but also the humans too. And I remember last summer, I had been working with a client who unfortunately had to sell her house, and a new family had moved in. And I was avoiding driving by because I was really scared to see what it looked like in case it had just gone and turned back into lawn, but it wasn't. And I got to have a really lovely conversation with the young mom who now lived there. And I pointed out the wild strawberries that we had planted. And she was so excited because she had a 2-year-old daughter and she could show her the edible plants in the lawn. And that made me really happy. And I think that's really what we try to do is like make those connections between people and landscapes and help all of us realize that, yeah, we are not separate from the larger ecosystem. We are part of it. It is all inclusive. So that's my story.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Kate. Right. And last but certainly not least, we will hear from Yannicka Allen. Yannicka is fired up about conducting research and monitoring and education that serves the needs of land stewards and their restoration efforts. She has worked on land stewardship and fire resilience issues from multiple angles, including researching the impacts of reburns on Alaska's boreal vegetation composition, helping carry out prescribed burns, and implementing wildfire mitigation and forest stewardship education programs in California. Yannicka grew up in California and has also lived in the Pacific Northwest, where she completed a BS degree in environmental science. While researching the impacts of prescribed fire in maritime, chaparral, and coastal prairie ecosystems, she completed a MS degree in biology and ecology. For fun, she enjoys playing percussion, getting outside, and spending time with friends and family.
Thanks
Yannicka,
so much.
thanks so much for being here. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me and for that intro. Like some other folks were saying, I feel like my family really influenced me. So growing up, having a family that for fun wants to go on hikes and be out in nature really kind of got me hooked. And I also grew up helping my family's business, which is a nonprofit that focuses on training teachers to incorporate solar lessons in their classrooms. So I got exposed to the world of environmental education through that. And after high school, I began working as a seasonal service aide at a couple of state parks near where I live in kind of coastal California. So that was a chance to help with campground management, trail crew, and park maintenance. And a big lasting impact on me was just getting confidence navigating out on fire roads, like being out there. And it was also a very public facing role. And eventually I realized that I personally wanted to focus more on land management for habitat. And so I was simultaneously a student at Portland State University. I would go there where I was working on my environmental science degree and during breaks from school work at the state parks. But I focused in on a lot of resource management courses. And I also joined a lab that was doing research on vegetation changes in Alaska. And that was kind of the first example for me of how when you change a fire regime and you're seeing fires on a landscape in a different way than historical. So in that case, burning more frequently, the vegetation that's there is impacted by it. And I finished college, and while I was figuring out what was next, I ended up doing a stewardship internship with an organization that has several preserves, and several of them burned in a wildfire. And that kind of opened up a window to me into what it can look like to do post-fire restoration. And the area I was working didn't burn very intensely, so it wasn't so much going in and actively putting in new plants or like reforestation efforts we think of in high severity fires, but it was more a focus on dealing with the effects of fire suppression. So areas where dozers had gone in to make fire breaks, we were now trying to control the erosion and really just restore those areas. We were also working on improving fire resilience for future fires and putting in things like shaded fuel breaks that can help reduce fire intensity when there is a fire. And I got to help with volunteer work days as well. After that, I moved to the Sierra Nevadas for a forest management apprenticeship. And this, for me, was a huge crash course in public land management. I was working for a nonprofit that partners a lot with the Forest Service and other landowners. And there's a whole lot of nuance involved in that. But I got to help with projects by laying out the treatment areas or surveying things like road stream crossings to prioritize where restoration should occur. And this region ended up experiencing California's second largest fire while I worked there. So it was almost 1 million acres, much of it high severity. And this just really exemplified that fire is continuing to be a bigger and bigger deal here in California. And it's not burning like it used to. So, like I mentioned before, with the work in Alaska, when the fire regime changes, the vegetation changes. And, you know, in California, most of our ecosystems they evolved to experience frequent low intensity fire, but we are not seeing that so much. And we're seeing more extreme fires as a result. And so I ended up going on to work as a project coordinator at a fire safe council. And my work focused on wildfire risk reduction, really interfacing with homeowners or just, residents, whether they own their home or not, to help them with home hardening and defensible space. And a lot of times folks will hear that, vegetation around their home is flammable and think, I better cut all the trees. So one of the things we focused on was kind of emphasizing that, no, you don't need to cut all the trees, but the vegetation needs to be spaced appropriately, and appropriate maintenance needs to happen so that the risk of your home burning down is lower. And I really wanted to be involved in proactive work to address what across most of California is a fire deficit. So I started getting prescribed fire training, and that included working at Santa Rosa Junior College's wildfire resilience program, which takes place at a forested campus. And with a very ecological focus. The work there involves thinning and pile burning and broadcast burning. And we've talked a lot there about how even when you're deciding to remove some invasives like French broom, it's better to think about like what you want there instead, rather than coming from a place of like, I hate this invasive, I want it gone, but more thinking about like all the native forbs that you're trying to create space for and have that be a motivation for doing that work. And I then decided to take a prescribed fire ecology research assistantship at San Jose State University. And a big project I worked on there was focused on coastal prairie restoration. So, like we heard earlier, a lot of grasslands are getting woodier. And in California's coastal prairies, we have a lot of shrub encroachment into these areas, especially because of fire exclusion, which in the past helped keep the prairies more open for grasses and forbs. And so the research I worked on looked at how we could use prescribed fire and also the fire combined with mechanical treatments to reduce those shrubs. And in doing this job, it was a chance to work on a lot of things like science communication, as well as crew leadership. And while I was there, I also completed my Master's of Science degree in biology. And now I'm working for the University of California Cooperative Extension, which is a branch of the University of California that really seeks to connect science-backed information to the people that need that information, just regular community members. And this is done by having employees based in counties all over the state. And a lot of states have a cooperative extension program linked with a land grant university, but it's often kind of like a unfortunately well-kept secret. So I had interacted with some of the programming that University of California's Cooperative Extension puts on previously, and now I'm helping put out that programming because my current role is a forest stewardship community education specialist. And so the programs I work on are aimed mainly towards forest landowners. And that really fits my broad goals of helping make change happen on the ground, because we have a lot of privately owned forest lands here. And a lot of times folks don't quite know what to do with it. Kind of like earlier we heard about, people with a yard that want to restore it, but aren't quite sure what to do. Our programs are aiming to help landowners with a bit more acreage steward that land. And the workshops are also open to other folks who are interested. And in California, forest management advice is done by registered professional foresters. So although I'm not a forester, I collaborate with many foresters, and they're able to really ground advice in the legal framework and all the nuances around what forest management looks like. And so I did want to put a plug that if folks are interested in forestry, it is definitely worth looking into universities with accredited forestry programs, because certainly here in California, that can help help you gain years towards that registered professional forester status. Although I, obviously didn't go that route, and I still get to work in this field with others who have that status. And I'll just turn it over back to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Yannicka. Really interesting career path. And thanks so much to all of our amazing speakers today for sharing. We're now going to transition to the Q&A session or portion of today's session. A reminder, feel free to add questions into either the chat or Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as we can. But firstly, we'll start with a question around how do you continue to learn and grow professionally outside of formal training or education? And any of the speakers, feel free to chime in.
I guess I can speak on it a little bit. So when I first started getting into particularly like the large acreage, like conservation sector, um, like I wanted to find out what the free tools were out there that could help me with learning about these concepts, learning about these protocols, and the ideas around why we burn at certain times of year, or why we look to bring the community dynamic towards better forb diversity and things like that. And there's a lot of really, really great government programs out there that are kind of scattered amongst a couple of different departments. But in the USDA, there is a lot of free programs out there. One of the things that I took advantage of was that FEMA has free wildland fire training, mostly as like a starter for wildland firefighters, but it's free to anyone. You just have to create an account, and you can learn about the tools, tips, and tricks that wildland firefighters use to either A, take care of wildfires, or B, perform prescribed burning on wildlands. And it was just a really fun free tool to learn how to do this large acreage management in a controlled and safe manner with that training. It doesn't translate very well to small spaces or urban spaces because most places you're not allowed to burn in city limits. But it was still fun to learn about the ecology of burning and why it's so important to our ecosystems. I'd say like get a library card. I use a library card constantly. And if you are at a university, while you have free access to all the information that's out there on the internet, download PDFs of journal articles so that you have them when you're no longer in your school journey. If you find a particular subject area interesting, just download as many PDFs as you possibly can of journal articles, or if there's free textbooks or things like that that you get with your university access. That's a great way to build your library. I don't know if anyone else has any more to add to that.
Yeah, I can probably add a little bit more. I mean, I think what's great about this area of work overall is that it encourages you to keep learning. And we're all learning constantly new things and adapting to those. So I think in a way it's very welcome to that and encouraging of it. I am someone who also learns a lot on the job. So I think doing internships or finding some job to start and just get you going, you can learn a lot from the people around you. And to that end, I'd also say finding community groups, going out on like even foraging hikes. There are lots of groups that do like plant identification, foraging, all sorts of things like that. And the wealth of knowledge that's out there is incredible. Working with the plants themselves gave me a lot of knowledge into how to design with plants. I'd also say conferences and like webinars and just like going and hearing other people and their perspectives really can blow your mind so much. So I think that's a really good way to also keep learning too.
Yeah, I'll add a little. I agree with what you both were saying. And as far as like ways to find more learning opportunities, I think plugging in with various groups, like in my region, there's a lot of prescribed burn associations. So even just being on their listservs, there will be opportunities to get out. I mean, specifically to get prescribed fire experience or adjacent trainings might be shared that way. And aside from conferences, memberships in different organizations, like I'm a member of the California Native Grassland Association. And I mean, I just saw them sharing about a grass ID workshop, and I've taken similar workshops like that. And through the Association for Fire Ecology, I got to sign up for a program where I have a mentor to talk to about fire ecology and think about, how I can grow in that field. And really just, whether it's through a formal program like that or just making friends or connections in your field, and whether it's on a lead mushroom hike or you and someone else are just out on a hike learning from each other. There's so much of that that's of value.
I just want to add just a couple things. So I'm at a university, so I do have that resource, but also botanical gardens, the Botanical Society of America, the American Society of Plant Taxonomists, American Society of Herbarium Curators. I'm also a part of like South African botanical societies. All of those have webinars, have free things for folks. That sometimes there's a little money for membership. A lot of times, if you're at the student level, they can waive those fees. I would just reach out to folks. I know when I was a student, I reached out to folks and said, "Hey, I'm interested in joining your organization, but I don't have money," and they waived fees. So just talk to folks if you don't have money. For those things, going to your botanical societies, they have a lot of chapters of e anyone from like elementary school all the way up to elderly folks, master gardeners. There's so much programming out there, and that you may not want to like garden, but I'm telling you, I love hanging around with master gardeners. They know so much about plants. I just love hanging out with some older folks that just know have a lot of knowledge about different aspects of plants that could even get you thinking about biodiversity, conservation, all sorts of things. Inspiration comes from so many different places. Don't forget about the government. So, Department of Natural Resources, like I work closely, I do a lot of conservation, genomics research with my local government here in Georgia. So, GADNR, Georgia Department of Natural Resources. Every state has a natural heritage program. I work with them as well. They do wildlife stuff, wildlife including animals, but also plants as well, and nature serve. So I'm gonna type some things in the chat for you all.
Awesome. Great answers. Chad, want to give space if you had things to add, but no pressure.
Yeah, no, I think those are all great responses. I mean, I would have said that professional organizations I think are a great way. The only other thing I would say is, like I mentioned in my talk, the certificate programs out there. If you're working with a company that does, you know, refunds you for education, continuing education and all that, that can sometimes be something to look at. So, yeah, that's all I would add. Great responses.
Thanks so much. So we've had another question come in. It said, "Hi, I'm a graduating computer science major that is looking to transition to a career where I can use my skills to help with climate change. Do you have any advice for how I can get started? I would love to connect with anyone that's experienced a career transition."
I haven't experienced a career transition myself. However, I will say that the majority of people I went through my design certificate program with were career changes. Landscape design seemed to be a really nice avenue for a lot of people to who maybe didn't have the chance to be artistic in a way beforehand. But also it marries this a science approach as well and a horticulture approach. Um, yeah, I think finding something that you're excited about, something you're passionate about, and finding like an easy, like quick little course almost, or like a just a class that you can take to kind of gauge how that feels, can be really helpful and really useful.
I would also,
Yeah, I and
Ooh,
okay.
sorry.
Go ahead.
I would also say in ecology, if you're like you're talking about climate change, but if you're interested in the plant side or the animal side and how they're impacted by climate change, your expertise as a computer scientist is going to be so helpful. I tell my students all the time, like the research that I do is ecology and like taxonomy based, more ecology, but I'm coding all the time. I'm coding in R, I'm coding in Python. I had to learn these skills. So if I had someone that knew these skills already and were interested in learning the ecology and biology, that's amazing. I would say reach out to professors that you're interested in their research and just talk to them about if they're willing to take you on and train you because in graduate school, if that's what you want to do, or in other business professions, we all have to learn. We all have to start somewhere. No one comes out of school or where they're from just knowing everything. And so we can teach you the ecology, the biology, and stuff like that, but you have that computer science skill. Like that's amazing. So I don't think you'll have a tough time looking towards conservation, and especially impacts in climate change.
Absolutely, yeah. And yeah, so I've changed my career twice, at least twice in my so far. And every time that I've done that, just kind of echoing what everybody else has been saying, I've used education as the way to do that, either through going back to school to get my master's or doing a certificate program, but doing something where I was surrounded by people that were either also looking to go that direction or people that were already in that direction, and then just starting to talk to them and get insights and making those connections and those networking opportunities. That's what's always helped me out.
Um, the next question, I know Yannicka already spoke a bit to her experience with mentorship, but curious if the rest of you have had a particularly impactful mentor on your career journey or someone at least who served in a mentorship role and what advice you might have for folks just starting in their careers and how to identify and work with a mentor.
I'll start and I'll just say that, I think you always need to be open, and mentors can come from anywhere. They don't necessarily have to be people that you directly report to. They can be anybody that you talk to that shows an interest in what you do and an interest in your career path. I think you can tap for mentorship opportunities. I think right now one of my best mentors is actually in National Wildlife Federation, Carrie Stanton, who I work with quite a bit. And she's been such a wonderful mentor to me and sustainability and biodiversity and habitats and everything. So, it doesn't have to be someone in your company. It can be, you can find them wherever you are.
Yeah, kind of echoing off of that. I mean, mentorships don't they can be formal and informal. There's plenty of examples of formal mentorships where you're paired with someone in a like field or you choose to reach out to somebody that you deem an expert that you would love to learn more about. There's also a lot of informal mentoring out there, and in the age of I talked about this in the chat a little bit, but in the age of social media, you at your fingertips have access to a wealth of information and a wealth of people. And so if you are a social media user and professionally reach out to people that you admire or that you like what they're up to or what they're doing or want them to elaborate on the things that they're doing, certainly don't bug them with like a million questions, but to have that touch point or build that relationship even via Instagram, is how I became friends or colleagues with so many of the folks that I admire and look up to. Just liking what they have going on, responding or messaging them based off of their Instagram stories, and then maybe starting to reach out with a couple of questions for them to elaborate on topics that they're already excited and posting about and things like that. So informal mentorship is really big in this industry too.
I would say one of my students taught me something so great about a couple semesters ago. They were looking for a job and they had a spreadsheet of folks that they found online, like you were saying, David, other folks that they had kind of worked with in passing, and they asked them to coffee. They said, "Hey, I'm really interested in your career pathway. Could I buy you a coffee?" And nine times out of 10, the person said yes, and you're not buying coffee, I will buy you coffee. So they got tons of like treats and stuff, and then they just built this fabulous network and found a wonderful job, but still are maintaining those relationships. So the mentors that I have, formal and informal, something that I tell folks is maintain those relationships. You don't have to talk to them every single month, but like, around Christmas time, just say, "How are you doing? This is what's going on with me. I just wanted to check in and see how things were doing." Like just maintain. I love getting those emails from folks as well that I mentor, and I'm just like, "Oh, hey." And then I'll think about them and send them opportunities, or if someone asks me about someone, I'm like, "Oh, I know a perfect person that could do this opportunity." So just put yourself out there. There are plenty of people that are willing to help you.
Yeah, really great suggestions. Thank you. Next question, wondering if there are any misconceptions about your fields of work that you'd like to clear up for emerging professionals.
I don't know. I kind of love what Kate said about using cultivars when you're meeting people where they're at. Like as a botanical garden professional, like there is not an option to only use native plants because we're also a museum of living collections, and of course we're holding on to things that were sent to us by the National Arboretum just to because we're outside of disease pressures for these things that are endangered maybe in their own native ranges and things like that. We can't only use native plants, and sometimes, especially with urban challenges like compaction and salt spray and all of the lovely pollution that we deal with in modern age, cultivars are bred specifically to survive in those spaces. They're plants that have been selected for their vigor in urban spaces, and so sometimes you might have to use a cultivar because the native plant or local ecotype just like won't cut it. There's also something to be said in the space that we're in now about the need for curb appeal, kind of across the country right now in the native plant world, especially in the design world. There's kind of two camps. There's the ones that go for native planting in a formal design setting, and then there's those that are much more either resource wise or experience level, are more interested in seeding in a meadow or a prairie that's a lot less formal. And they are experiencing challenges and sometimes direct argument from either their neighbors or in HOAs about how native plants are being legislated out of urban spaces because people see them as weedy or messy. Um, and so one of my misconceptions, I think, is that in this space, it's lovely to use native plants in urban spaces, and we should be doing more of it. We should be experimenting with so many more native plants. But we also need to keep in mind that we have to be courteous to the view sheds of our neighbors and make sure that we're not actively making governments against the use of native plants in urban spaces. So.
I can state a misconception that I had coming into the field, which I feel like there might be some shared sentiment. Uh, I thought I was late to the game. I grew up with someone who had been screaming about native plants for my whole life. So by the time I graduated college, I thought I was behind. And truly, the surge had only just, like, interest of habitat restoration, pollinator habitat has only just taken off. And even now, there's still room. And I think you can make an impact, um, no matter what time you're coming in. There's always room for more and room for growth and room to bring your own unique perspective. And that is helpful, honestly. All new perspectives are helpful in face of climate change and developing climate resiliency. There was someone who spoke in the chat a little while ago about, feeling overwhelmed and where to go with this. And I can certainly empathize and relate to that. What I like about the work that I do is that I feel like I can make tangible change even on a very, very small scale. And so, no matter what direction you choose to go in, my advice would just be to find something that helps you feel that even on a tangible small scale, that you are making a positive change. Like that is just one little garden behind me. And there's a sea of lawn all around it, but it is making incremental change. And that's something I think that we can all think about when we're faced with this is it's the little stuff that matters.
I think one of the things that popped to my mind about misconceptions, at least like within the group of people who have accepted that we need more fire, we can get into this mindset of thinking like all fire that we can put down on the ground is good, but the quality of it matters too. And, sometimes we get into this framework of low intensity is good everywhere, but there's still areas that do need high fire intensity and where it is appropriate to have stand replacing fire. And so I think, a lot of times in the workshops I'm involved in, the answer is it depends. And that's like really valid to keep in mind. And then also, now that I'm in such a forest focused kind of workspace, I think it's easy to like we're shifting the thought, we know sometimes more trees is not better, like a lower tree density is going to be more resilient, but also I think we need space to remember that there's really great other valuable things like meadows, and we've lost so many meadows, and restoring them would both help with fire resilience and biodiversity. So really just there's so much nuance, and not forgetting that is important.
I think I would just say that although I do have a PhD, a lot of this work you don't need a PhD. You just need a passion. You just need willingness to learn. I'm not against the PhD. I have four PhD students looking for money to take more because I love what I do. I love research, but just don't let that be the bar to stop you. And if you find some internships and there's so many different avenues, just like everyone's saying, there's so many different ways to help the planet and to bring native plants and to combat climate change. So find your pathway. Also, some misconceptions about herbaria because I'm just like, I will never stop just talking about herbaria is that we're my students, I do say we're a museum of dead plants, but it's not dead in there. We are the herbarium at UGA is so alive. We do so many programming with students. We do a lot of plant pressing and like arts, botany and art, sketching, botanical illustration, Christmas parties, along with all the research that's happening in at the herbaria. So if you have a herbarium close to you, just check them out and see what they're doing, see if you can volunteer, because that's also a good way to learn about the plants before you physically see them. And so since I did a lot of my work in other countries, I would go to herbariums and look at the herbarium sheets and kind of get this picture image in my mind and kind of sit with the plant and see what it looks like before I got in the field to see what they look like alive and well. But it was nice to have this search image in my mind of, and it's different from a picture on a screen to actually have a tangible sheet with the plant there. I don't know how to describe it, but does something to my mind where I can remember the plant name and physical characteristics. So when I'm out in the field, then I can ID it much faster than just looking at a book or something on my phone. But visit your local herbarium.
Love it. All right, I think we have time for maybe just one more quick question uh, around kind of the topic of burnout, recognizing that burnout is pretty high in entrepreneurial and mission-based work. So curious how each of you manage work-life balance, what strategies you might use for personal well-being to keep yourselves healthy and whole.
I'll kick that one off. And unfortunately, my camera quit working because my background picture kind of relates to what I was going to talk about. Because I think for me, just getting out in nature anytime I can to recharge is the biggest thing. And that picture that I had behind me was from one of my mountain bike rides in this area in Arizona, and I take pictures all the time because I'm riding and I'm just in awe, when you get out there. And it was funny during COVID when we started doing all these calls and people are looking for different backgrounds and all that, and I was like, well, shoot, I'm going to start using all these pictures that I'm taking while I'm writing, and I'm going to start using those as my background. And so now it's kind of turned into a whole thing, and I've really enjoyed it. But just anytime, pretty much every day at the end of the day, I at least take a couple of minutes to get outside and just decompress. And it's amazing the benefits of being outside and connecting and helping you to remember why you're doing what you're doing. Just so many benefits.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like our field is a field of hope. It's a field of optimism. Like we are working towards a better future. And so making sure that you come back to your personal mission of what you're doing in this field and reminding yourself that even on the bad days, on the days that you're disheartened, that every little thing that you do, whether you notice the impact or not, is making the world a better place. One of my favorite things to do after like a really hard or disheartening day is to go out and find something that's flowering, figure out if it has a smell or not, see if it's hosting anything, if there's caterpillars on it, and grounding myself in that space with beautiful plants. Just reminding myself where I am, what I'm doing, and the impact that I have on the world. For work-life balance, if you can separate work and home to the best of your abilities, I highly encourage you to do so. Just like don't check your email on your phone if you can help it. Like try to keep that in the workplace. I have a hard time doing that because I married a horticulturist, so it's plants all the time. But at home, it's my home garden. At work, it's my work garden, and so I can separate those ideas out. But yeah, remember, it's all about hope.
I really love that, that this is a field of hope and optimism. I wholeheartedly agree. Um, and I laughed because, as someone who started their own business, I have been absolutely horrific at work-life balance. Absolutely terrible. And so, but that's made me super protective of other people who work for me and their work-life balance. And I am learning to be better. But one of the things that I did early on was, and this was some good advice, was to, at a certain time of day, turn off. So even if because for a long time, my office was my home, so I didn't have the ability to just leave and go home and have that commute to decompress. But to establish, if you are working for yourself, office hours. Okay, from 9 to 5, those are my office hours. And I agree with what David said. I recently took email off my phone, so I don't get alerts anymore. I would get alerts over the weekend, and it would throw me into anxiety. And I try now also to preserve my weekends more. I used to work most days. Or I would agree to things that would drain me, and like other extracurricular activities. So I'd say, like, as far as having work-life balance, one of the things I had to learn was that work was my passion, and I would also get absorbed in other things that were similar and made me passionate at other activities, and I needed to scale that back too. So you really do need that decompression time. I agree, you need that outdoor time to like literally touch grass. But to establish those routines, those hours, and maybe find something that does relax you. Um, I recently got into doing a little bit of art. I'm not very good at it, but it's something that like lets me kind of turn off one side of my brain and just have fun. Like maybe find something that's literally just silly fun. And that is a really helpful way to just shut off a little bit.
Those are such good things. I agree with all of that. And I will say I don't have work-life balance. I am pre-tenured, which means that I do not have a permanent job right now. And so I work all the time, but I am trying to do better. And I do a lot of hiking because being in the herbarium, I do like to collect things for the herbarium. So I'm out hiking, pressing things. I have a home garden. It's small, but it's what I can manage. And that really helps me get outside every day. And also talking about art, I do some painting and I do some crocheting, and that has been a world, just a world to kind of like stop my brain from thinking about plants and science. It's just been so nice. I'm making baby blankets for my friends who have just, we have a what 2 week old right now in my friends group, and so I just completed a blanket and a little hat, and that's kind of my work-life balance, and being outside and trying to get better at iNaturalist. Like I'm trying to compete with my students right now. So, but yeah, finding fun things to do.
Love it. Well, yep, we are at time. Thank you all so much for sharing your stories, your great advice. It's been really wonderful spending time with all of you and learning so much from each of you. So thank you so much. Thank you also to our attendees for joining us for this discussion. We invite you to come back for our next session in just a few minutes. We'll reconvene that panel at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And that is the career planning workshop with Jerry Taylor. But thank you all so much, and hopefully we'll see some of you in a few minutes.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.